Good morning. It is Monday, the 1st of June. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this is Europe Today, your morning dose of European news and analysis, live here on Euronews. Coming up, EU enlargement is in the spotlight. Council President Antonio Costa heads to the Western Balkans today for a 5-day visit, culminating in a special summit in Montenegro this Friday. The small Balkan nation says it is ready to become the next country to join the European Union, but EU members need to make up their mind. Meanwhile, Malta's Labour Party has secured an unprecedented fourth consecutive term in office, delivering a major victory for Prime Minister Robert Abela. The snap vote this weekend was called a year ahead of schedule amid concerns over the impact of the Middle East crisis on tourism and rising inflation. Plus, China has warned Brussels against imposing new trade restrictions following talks here aimed at addressing Beijing's industrial overcapacity. The EU says its trade relationship with China is no longer sustainable and that stronger measures are needed to protect European industries from a surge in Chinese imports. But first, Paris Saint-Germain's historic Champions League victory was marred by violence this weekend. As celebrations spread across France, so did clashes between football fans and police, leading to nearly 800 arrests, more than 200 injured and one dead linked to the incidents. The French President Emmanuel Macron is furious.
Malheureusement, on a vu.
Unfortunately, we've seen, and I don't want us to get used to it, and nobody wants us to get used to it, scenes of unacceptable violence in Paris and other cities. This isn't about football. This isn't about sport. It's because we like it. So, thank you to our police officers. There will be no flexibility for those who have been caught. We don't want to see this anymore. Enough. We had it. It's over.
Terminé.
For more on what exactly happened and why these scenes have become a reoccurring challenge for authorities, we're joined here in the studio by Euronews' Jerry Fisayo Bami, who's been following the story for us all weekend. Good morning and thanks for being here. And look, it's just not the first time we've seen this kind of violence. What are the root causes?
Maeve, first off, what a big Champions League final weekend we saw. Hats off to both sides, Arsenal and PSG. They gave us a very good match. Maybe not a very good match. I mean, considering the nature of, the how things played out. But 120 minutes of football, and congratulations to Arsenal for putting up a formidable performance. Congrats to PSG for becoming the only side to win the Champions League title, to retain the title, and for the second time back-to-back. Unfortunately, that's not what we're talking about now. The news has been overshadowed by the ugly and chaotic scenes that we saw in Paris. Arrests have been made, 800 arrests have been made. But interestingly, they're not hardcore football fans. So these were simply fans or rioters or people who were just exploiting this situation or the occasion to foment trouble. And it is not the first time we're seeing it in France. And you need to look at it within the wider context of hooliganism in France and urban riots in France. We've seen the Yellow June, the Gilets Jaunes protest, the Yellow Vest protest, the pension reform protest. So over the last decades, we've seen a lot of protests in France, and it just seems that the violence that we're witnessing is such that it's occurring within this society in a way that reflects wider disparity or wider issues regarding policing, trust in public institutions, and inequality.
And how could it be put to an end? We saw earlier how the French President Emmanuel Macron was so upset to see how this dampened the celebrations all through the weekend.
Well, I think the French authorities have been doing their best. Let's bring in facts here. Look, with regards to law enforcement, over the weekend and in anticipation of the final itself, authorities deployed some 20,000 police officers across the country. In Paris, the capital alone, there were 8,000 police officers. And this was because if you look at even last year when this violence celebration happened last year, when PSG won their first ever Champions League title at the time. The anticipation had been there, but even at that, this did not curtail the violence that took place. So when we talk about the federations, UEFA itself has been working with the countries, with the supporters, the local authorities, and they have since 2012 and 2013 season, they've required clubs to have a liaison officer to coordinate, some some of these things, the coordination between the fans, the supporters, and the local authorities and police, I think it's worked in some places. But the question for France is really about, is this about football hooliganism, or is this about urban riots and something that reflects a much deeper problem? And I think going forward, you need to look at, can we have faster prosecutions? Can authorities also deploy new measures, like, or maybe stricter penalties, stricter punishments that will make a deterrent for many who would want to go into this and think twice.
Indeed, it's certainly not a problem that will go away overnight, Jerry. Thank you so much for your analysis there. And also actually in France, the former French Prime Minister Gabriel Attal has kicked off his presidential election campaign with a huge rally in Paris. He's vowing to move beyond the Macron era and reform a system that he says is no longer delivering for the French people. For more on that story, you can visit Euronews.com. But now, moving on. After a successful visit to Brussels, the Hungarian Prime Minister Peter Magyar managed to unfreeze the billions of unfrozen funds for his country. But, and there's a big but, he will have to complete a long list of reforms before the bank transfer is actually made. For more, we can head to Budapest, where Euronews' Zoltán Zibosegi is standing by for us this morning. So tell us, Zoltán, Hungary still faces huge hurdles to unlock these billions. Will they manage?
Good morning, Europe today. Yes, as you mentioned, we are talking about 16.4 billion euros, what is the biggest financial pact in the modern Hungarian history. I talked with several decision makers, and they really agreed with each other that they try to rebuild the budget in the country from step by step, as they mentioned, from brick to brick. And the most important mission, what they try to manage, is to agree about these funds. And actually, they managed it. This is what they know so far, and they don't have a proper action plan for the rest of the year. The only one thing what they know, that they promised to Brussels to end up for the corruption. Most of the opposition parties, mostly the Fidesz, the ex-government party, demanded to make it public what Peter Magyar promised to Ursula von der Leyen, what he sacrificed, but he replied that the only thing what he promised is that he will end up the Fidesz corruption. There are, of course, some critical points. For example, there is not enough money in the budget, in the terrible shaped budget, for the pension and tax reforms. And of course, one of the most hot topic is migration, because for 10 years, the government was campaigning against migration, and people are a little bit xenophobic. So it's a really sensitive topic.
And just very briefly, we've seen also Peter Magyar turning up the pressure on the president, calling on him to resign. Tell us more.
So actually, now he is in the Alexander's Palace, in the President's Palace, try to convince the president to step down, because yesterday he announced that he's not going to step down. And of course, here in Hungary, the president has symbolic power, but still, it can destroy the plans of the Tisza party, because they have just 3 months for all the reforms, and he can block it, or at least he can make it slower, because he has a political veto. And it's really difficult to remove him, because the parliament can impeach him, but the last what says is actually the Constitutional Court, and the judges of the Constitutional Court still are the people of the Fidesz party.
OK, Zoltán Zibosegi, thank you so much for that live update there from Budapest. And now for the view from a former European Commissioner that was actually in charge of rule of law and values. We're joined by Vera Jourova, the Czech politician who was Vice President of the European Commission until 2024. Great to have you with us here in the studio.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
And of course, you're very familiar with the issues in Hungary. You've followed them for many years as Vice President there. Hungary now has a new government. Viktor Orban seems to have disappeared. Your view on this new era?
Well, I was happy, I have to say, after the elections. Not only that Viktor Orban is leaving after so many years, and after what he has done to Hungarians, but I was happy that the democratic system worked. Changing of the guards happened in Budapest.
And Peter Magyar, the new Prime Minister, he was here in Brussels. There was a deal struck. He was here on Friday. They managed to unlock the funds, but he has a long list of reforms to do. Will he manage? It seems like mission impossible there if you listen to our correspondent.
He has a long list of things to do in a very short time, because most of the money should be used, committed and invested by August this year. So this is a very short deadline. Yes, a long list of things which should not be surprising. Yeah, because European taxpayers were urging us in the Commission to do more to protect the money going to Hungary, not to pay the gifts for Viktor Orban's families and friends.
And there's a 3-month deadline here. What happens if they don't reach the deadline?
Well, I think that it is feasible to do some reforms in case the legislative process is fast. Of course, it would be difficult to fulfill something which needs more preparations. But as I said, Hungarians, the current government is not surprised. These are not new requests from Brussels.
What would be the hardest?
I think there are things relating to judiciary independence and division of powers between different layers of justice system. They should do changes in media world.
And should more have been done before by the previous commission that you were in?
We tried to convince Orban's government to join the European Public Prosecutor's Office. This was the main thing I wanted them to do, because to protect the EU money...
But they never listened to you. They didn't trust you. They didn't like you.
You know, they didn't believe that this will go without any reaction if they didn't join. But after that, the reaction on it was the mechanism to freeze the money when the money is not protected enough.
Another thing Hungary, of course, under Orban was blocking was Ukraine's membership. This week, we're seeing Antonio Costa in the Western Balkans trying to put momentum on their potential membership. What is your view here? Who should be the next member to join the European Union?
I spoke in recent weeks to many Western Balkan people, and they are fed up to be 20 years in the waiting room. There must be some move. And over time, I see that more and more we need them to join than they need Europe. This is obvious that we need to have courage to grow politically, geographically. We are under big pressure from outside.
If you were a commissioner right now, that's my question, what would keep you up at night?
What would keep me up at night? The state of democracy and rule of law in Europe in general. That's why, by the way, I'm here, because I am launching today with my team the new project Democracy 27, which is a citizens' initiative and which would complement what the Commission is doing.
Would it be China, Russia, Trump?
In international foreign policy, honestly, it's the United States, which scares me.
Vera Jourova, thank you so much for coming into us here
on
Europe Today. Now, moving on, the United Nations will be meeting this Monday for a talks called by France to discuss the latest Israeli offensive in Lebanon that saw the capture of Beaufort Castle in the south of the country. It comes as Lebanese authorities say the death toll in the country since early March is now over 3,371. For more, we can head now to Dubai and bring in our regional correspondent, Jane Witherspoon. Jane, tell us more about this escalation in Lebanon.
Yes, as you mentioned, over the weekend, Israel has taken control of Beaufort Castle in southern Lebanon. It's a move that has been condemned by France. They're calling for that UN Security Council meeting that you mentioned. The Israeli flag is now flying high above that medieval fortress. This is the deepest incursion in the country in almost a quarter of a century. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, has said the capture of the castle marks a dramatic turning point in Israel's campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon.
And meanwhile, we're hearing President Trump, Jane, saying he wants to make a deal with Iran, but at the same time, the US military has struck a commercial ship. Fill us in on all these details.
That's correct, yes. The US military struck that commercial ship trying to enter Iran earlier in the morning. US Central Command have said the Gambia-flagged cargo ship ignored around more than 20 warnings, in fact. It was eventually stopped when the US forces fired a missile into its engine room. And this, of course, comes as hostility has resumed across the region over recent days. And, of course, the world is waiting with bated breath to see if that ceasefire deal can be negotiated.
OK, Jane Witherspoon, thank you so much for that live update there from Dubai. And we can move on now. Romania's President Nicu Jordan has released proof that the drone which hit a residential building in Galați last week was a Russian drone. He says Moscow is, quote, solely responsible. For the view from the European Space Agency on their role here in defence and security, Euronews' Lauren Walker sat down with the head of the European Space Agency, Joseph Aschbacher.
We are not a military organization. We are a space agency. And as a space agency, we develop technology that can be utilized by other users, including the defense community. So our job and my job is to, first of all, define together or on the basis of requirements from the security defense communities or other users, to define the space infrastructure that is needed in order to help them collecting information, communicating, navigating, and really being sure that they have the tools that space can provide for their defense purposes.
And you can catch the rest of that interview on Euronews. But now I'd like to bring in the Romanian diplomat and politician Mircea Joana, former Deputy Secretary General of NATO until 2024, and now one of the country's most prominent voices on security and defence. So good morning, sir. Thank you so much for being with us here on Europe Today. First, everyone's wondering what the situation now is like in Galați, and do people feel safe?
You know, the shock of the Russian incursion and explosion on a block of apartments in Galați is still here with us. Just for our viewers to see, Galați is a big city, industrial city on the Danube. On the other side of the river, there is Ukraine, and Russia is constantly attacking infrastructure on the Ukrainian side. And a few times, and this was the most severe incident, they cross the border, the airspace of Romania, NATO country. And that's why in Galați, in the Danube Delta, there is a little bit of concern that has been accumulated in time in the 4 years and something before.
And Romania's Air Force couldn't intercept this drone. Why is that?
You know, a Romanian pilot, an F-16 pilot, shot down a drone in Estonia just a few days back. They didn't have enough time and space to shoot. And the question is, what do you shoot? A drone? Do you need an F-16? Do you need an F-35? Do you need a missile which is so expensive? So I think the lesson from this, and I think we should have learned it all over the eastern flank of NATO sooner, is that you need adequate anti-drone sensors, anti-drone equipment, faster procurement systems, because these things change so fast. The innovation cycle for drone war is changing so fast that I think our systems are robust, but sometimes there is a basic disbalance between the kind of assets we have and the kind of needs we actually have for such incidents.
Because if this happened once, it's going to happen again. And Romania is clearly not prepared for these kind of frequent drone incursions.
We have a specific geographical situation, as I mentioned, is basically very close. So I think we have to find adequate solutions. Acoustic sensors, this is something that technology exists. Anti-drone systems, this technology exists. The question that we have to procure so much for everything, from high-intensity war or, high-level gear, let's say lower-end technology like this one is needed. And I think we have to really prioritize better and internalize the lessons learned from Iran and from Ukraine, because the two fusion of lessons learned, and I think we have to do much better. Not only Romania, but I think we see such incidents all along the eastern flank, especially the countries neighboring Ukraine, like Romania is.
And what would be the next step? And with the support of NATO here, of course, if this happens again and escalates?
I think we have to do a much better effort to try to find the right kind of air and missile defense for NATO in general. So if for mid-altitude and high-altitude, let's say there are some things in place, Patriot missiles, the F-16s, the F-35s, NATO operations, for these basically low-altitude things, we are still lacking the kind of adequate means. They do exist on the market. You can acquire them. The only thing is that you have to put your right priorities in the right place, try to make sure that you keep up with the innovation cycle. This electronic jamming, this drone thing changed basically every other few months. So I think we have to do a much faster cycle of procurement and adaptation to this new warfare.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, for joining us here this morning. And that does bring this edition of Europe Today to an end. For more news and analysis, as always, you can visit euronews.com, or you can drop us a line or an email at europetoday@euronews.com. Thanks so much for watching. Take care and see you soon.